Could you just outline the issues that you addressed?
Today we were speaking at the conference about the migration and asylum policies of the EU, but also of neighboring states from the EU. I was in my speech talking about the very horrifying case of refugees, of over 70 refugees who tried to reach Lampedusa, starting from Tripolis in the year 2011, and only 9 of them survived, because they were 14 days long on the Mediterranean, and although there were many ships going by, more or less no one helped the refugees, and most of them died. And now at the moment we have a report being written about this horrible case, and at that time there was also NATO presence because of the war in Libya in the Mediterranean, but many ministers and also the responsible people from the NATO told that there were no NATO ships or helicopters being involved for trying to rescue the people. So this is just one very horrifying case, unfortunately, how there is sometimes no rescue at the Mediterranean, and how refugees who try to reach the EU are being left alone and die at sea. I'm a member of the parliament for the Austrian Green Party, and I try to make a change in the human rights policy, so no refugee, no person dies in the Mediterranean or on the outskirts, on the frontiers of the EU.
How do you see the EU's refugee migration policies? How do you view them? Are they based on human rights? Do you think they should be should be changed, or how do you explain this?
There should be a grave policy change in the European Union concerning asylum and human rights, because although on paper there are human rights for refugees, the practical policy is very much is to try from the EU so refugees cannot reach Europe at all. We have many cases, thousands of cases actually, where the asylum application of refugees are not being taken from the authorities, and we have the problem that the EU tries via Frontex, for example, to close the borders so people cannot reach EU borders at all. So we have grave problems with human rights there, and the EU and every government in the EU should change the policy to a concrete human rights policy, so refugees are really being taken care of and not dismissed or not accepted to the EU.
What are the recommendations or your approach that you address? What are the recommendations you and your party?
My recommendations and the recommendations of my party are that the EU should take seriously the European and fundamental rights, and there are many treaties EU states have signed concerning human rights. That means we should abolish Dublin II, the Dublin II system, for example, that the refugees are being sent all over Europe from one country to the other, and there should be standards, common standards concerning the reception and the help for refugees in every EU country the same. If we will have very different standards, also very different human rights standards, the refugees will of course try to reach those countries where they have a better treatment. So to solve many problems we need common standards in each and every EU country, actually in whole Europe, not only in the EU, but we have to change this politically.
Like how? Common standard means...
To make, we need more pressure on the governments in every country of the EU and in Europe. So those governments would say to the public, there are human rights and we are obliged to fulfill these human rights, and not try to abolish rights of refugees.
People from other countries, like from Africa or Asian countries, they are so desperate to enter Europe. So how do you see that people are so much keen to come here in Europe, and anyhow they want to come here?
I don't think that someone wants to leave his home country just for fun. Most people want to stay in their home country, actually, but also through politics of the EU, for example, through land grabbing, many people are not able anymore to live there and to earn enough money or to have enough to eat. So if there is this false policy that makes people, jobless, through land grabbing, for example, then we shouldn't wonder when people try to get to another country to get a living. So we could solve a big part of the problem as the EU, actually, through a more fair policy, also in trade relations.